Hello.
What is this?
Hello. It is not a crappy day.
Well, you'll have to put that on the main screen, my friend. Now we see it. Poo poo.
Sorry, I forgot about that.
Where did you get that?
Oh, this has been a staple of ours now, home for a number of years.
All right, your house must be fun.
My question,
welcome everybody.
Question to you, of course, is it appropriate?
Depends on your point of view and where you're coming from. We'll be talking about that. Oh, now, see, we should have talked about this before we go live. Dear friends, this is what happens if your co-conspirator springs something on you. Welcome, everybody. This is the Friday edition of Two Chaps, Many Culture, the place where too much culture is never enough. Isn't that the catchphrase now, Brett?
Absolutely, blatantly stolen off my. Well, not all of it. I mean, it is appropriated and adjusted for our personal needs. Yes, too much culture is never enough.
Appropriated. I'm loving it because the intent of today's session that Brett and I have prepared for you. Is we want to talk to you about a concept called the zone of appropriateness. What is appropriate? Is that hat? Appropriate shows the hat again, Brett.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Oh, come on. Is that appropriate? Don't poo-poo on his hat. So
we're trying to be serious here. Is this appropriate?
Depends on who you ask, I would say.
Absolutely.
And zone of appropriateness. It is a concept that I'm very fond of ever since I came across it in this book. So if you haven't read this yet, so let me hold this so everybody can see it. It says Global Dexterity, and the author is no other than Andy Molinsky. And you see this is published in a legitimate publishing company. So it's not just your, hey, I wrote something and self-published it. So this is in Harvard Business Press. Andy is a teacher at the business school at Brandeis University in Boston. He's very smart. And he wrote this book a couple of years ago, and I've been a fan since because it brought to my awareness something that most of you probably inherently know, that we don't always behave the same way given different situations. So there is no person is monolithic and no culture is monolithic, or is it monolithical? Oh gosh, English grammar, not my friend. So we are not the same with everybody. We don't show up in the world just one way. We don't have only one default setting. Well, we may have a default setting, but we have variations of it. And that's what zone of appropriateness is trying to, or is successfully describing, that we have a behavioral flexibility, behavioral bandwidth within which we can show up, in which we can be. I can be more direct with Brett because he gets it. I can also be a little less direct and more flowery in my approach to people here in the US South where I live, or even with people from many indirect cultures. One that comes to mind right now is India, that I've had the pleasure of interacting with frequently. So I learned to be more indirect in my communicative approach. So I have that bandwidth already built in. And when we're talking about a zone, it can be expanded. So that zone doesn't have to be rigid. Well, you can choose to keep it the way you were raised and stay the way you are, or you can choose to expand that zone a little bit. And that's what that book is about, and that's what zone of appropriateness is about. Brett, I see that you have something coming. Oh yeah, here it is. So How would you interpret that visual?
Well, this is great. I mean, my comfort zone, I've come across many situations, and I was just telling somebody about a story of my first trip to Poland. Of course, those who don't know, my wife is Polish, and before we were married, she took me to Poland to meet the family, of course, and it was a great trip, and I was very excited. And as a typical happy traveler, she had taken me into a local chocolate shop. You know, we all love European chocolate, right? This chocolate shop was just fantastic, and you know, the smells and the flavors, and it was just wonderful. And I was so happy, I was whistling, you know, yeah. And I was all of a sudden immediately aware that I had a feeling that I had eyes on me from some way, and I turned around and there was this guy standing there, and he was staring at me like I'd killed his favorite dog, and very, very just kind of like, what the hell are you doing here? You know? And I thought, and I'm kind of sitting there, I'm standing there, and I'm thinking, is he looking at me? You know, I mean, surely that's not the kind of face of a guy that's in a chocolate shop. And all of a sudden, him and my wife at that time, Martha, you know, my girlfriend at that time, now wife, they started this very intense conversation. Of course, at that point, I couldn't speak any of the language, so I didn't know what they were talking about. But it was only after that, after the whole thing kind of simmered down, that Martha said to me, you know, it's actually not very appropriate. It's probably one of the heights of rudeness to whistle indoors in Poland. Now, I could have said, well, you might have told me that before, because, you know, I whistle a lot. That's what I do. I love music. I whistle a lot. But I mean, that was my comfort zone. I was in my zone, man. I loved it. It was fantastic, you know. But it is still difficult for me not to do that in Poland. That's uncomfortable for me. But I can stretch it, you know, as you say, as Andy says. You know, we can stretch what.
That's Andy, by the way. If you were wondering who that handsome man here is, that's Andy. Yes,
and we kind of you know, I could have. I guess you're talking. He also talks here about this low level of assertiveness. I mean, I was in my comfort zone. Then, of course, with that interaction, I could have been assertive and got mad. I mean, I really was in a foreign country, in a foreign place, completely out of my comfort zone, completely out of it. So I didn't know really what was appropriate in terms of me defending my wonderful girlfriend, you know, all that kind of thing. It was an interesting interaction. I've used it a lot as a kind of example of, you just, you know, when you're in a completely foreign, uncomfortable place, where really I was in a comfortable place that turned very uncomfortable very quickly.
Right.
That was the difference.
And the pushback, or not only pushback, I did get some pushback when I introduced this topic in coaching or training programs, but also I also trigger interest. And I recently mentioned the zone of appropriateness in an article that I was privileged to provide some input for. The Toastmasters International magazine just published a story about giving feedback, and David Livermore of the Cultural Intelligence Center and Pellegrino Riccardi, TED Talker, and a couple of others, including myself, were asked to give input for that story. If you get a chance, check it out, Toastmasters.com, I believe, in their July issue. It's a big story about giving feedback, and I'm mentioning that zone of appropriateness, and people have been responding to that, and they said, yeah, but doesn't that mean that I have to give up who I am? And this is exactly what Andy and many of us in our field keep telling our clients. It's not about changing who you are. You're not losing yourself of the process of adjusting to somebody else's cultural behaviors. You're still being yourself. You're staying within your zone of appropriateness. You just go to that fringe of that zone if necessary. And if possible, with some guidance, with some training, with some coaching, you can expand that zone. often wear a bracelet, a rubber band, which highlights that. It's almost like you go to the gym, right? You flex your muscle, you extend the flexibility of your limbs, or you put on more weights to push or pull or whatever it is you do at the gym, or you run faster, harder. That is the same thing you can do to your behavioral zone.
Yeah.
And it is really upon you how much you want to flex, how much you want to expand that zone, but nobody's asking you to give up who you are or become disingenuous in your behavior, because then you're putting on an act. But you can stay within your zone and be a bit flexible, and the person you're interacting with will intuitively recognize that. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I must say that in that experience, the end of it was that the young girls that were serving people in the store after this gentleman left said, "I think people should be happier. You know, why can't we whistle indoors?" You know, there was almost like this mini kind of debrief of the whole situation. So, I mean, I guess me pushing the envelope brought at least some other people to the point. It was like, "Oh, hang on, why do we have that tradition?
Mm-hmm.
Why does it exist? And why can't we just be, show our happiness and joy if we're in a certain situation? After all, it's just whistling." But it's how embedded these things are in culture, in the mindset of people, especially if they're older, that, I certainly offended the guy, and I felt bad for it. But then I thought, hang on, I'm in a chocolate shop.
And you mentioned a critical point here. When somebody's a bit more advanced in age, that's when behavioral standards have become so concrete, so well carved in stone, so to say, that it may be a bit harder to step away from that or take a different look at it. I noticed this with my parents, and as I'm getting older, my kids are probably noticing it with me, no matter how much I preach it and no matter how much this is part of the work that I do. It doesn't change the fact that some of my beliefs that I hold on dearly will probably get more galvanized the more I progress in age. Who knows? But I'm trying to stay as flexible and as what's the word? Nimble or well, I go to the mental gym frequently.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's great. And obviously we're surrounded with people that are, that have had a lot of experience in life, and they're sometimes the ones that push us to do new things. If you've practiced I think that's great, that mental nimbleness over a period of time, it becomes a practice, and you're constantly, pushing the envelope and looking and push. That's what I find I'm doing sometimes. Maybe it'd be more comfortable if I just sat there and just didn't. But
it is certainly more comfortable not to exercise, whether it's physical or mental. I mean, anytime you pick up your phone and look at social media in these days, and you find something posted by people that you disagree with fundamentally, it probably will be painful to take those steps mentally through their argument, and I still do it. I'm reminding myself not to be triggered by it. I still listen or read positions that fundamentally disagree with my position, and I try to see the intent behind it. And sometimes I find it, sometimes I don't. And yes, it hurts my brain. However, what's the other option is to live in my bubble and have everybody agree with me and not hurt my brain. That's like you never go to the gym because you're afraid to be sore the next day. I know it's an overused phrase, and it sounds generic and trite, but nothing ever grows inside the comfort zone. It simply doesn't. If you want to grow, you'll have to endure some risk, some stretch marks, some sort of pain, whether it's physical or mental. So,
absolutely. Yep. Yeah. Good topic. I mean, we could talk about
get it on Amazon or wherever you buy your books. Good book. You'll like it. Trust me.
Absolutely. And what I like about Andy is he's crossed, he's a wonderful, big brain.
Yeah, indeed.
Which is intimidating for some people, but man, the guy can translate it into, really the real world. And that's what's great about the people that we learn from. We try and get or learn from people who can do that, who can balance those, bring those messages, those great academic, research-minded type of people, bring these things into the real world and apply them where they actually have impact, and that's always great with Andy. He does that well.
I've had him on my podcast where he talks about this. So when we're done here, I'll find the link to the podcast episode and post it in the comments. So check it out. Andy's a cool dude. Cool. So we're headed into the weekend, and we're headed at.
What are you up to on the weekend, sir?
Well, reading. I'm still reading. I did bring that book. It's on my nightstand. I'm reading another book right now by a gentleman down in Singapore. Another Bostonian. There's a theme here. A book by. There it is. You've got it. Look at that. Dang it! As if you rehearsed that. So
I'm doing the same thing. Look at that.
Kyle Haggerty, The Accidental Business Nomad. That's a fun read as well. Not quite as scientific as Andy's. It's more of a business storytelling book, which you might find hilarious. And by the way, another shameless plug here. Kyle was on my podcast too, so I'm gonna post that link. You were on my podcast. I was on your podcast. Man, this is a circle jerk of podcasters.
It is.
So I'm reading that book. I'm almost done. So hold it up again so people go on Amazon, because hey, it's COVID times. Help an author out. Read this book, The Accidental Business Nomad, Kyle Haggerty from Boston. He lives in Singapore. That's where his business is. So there's a lot of the stories revolve around his experience doing business, not only in Singapore, but throughout the APAC region, and the challenges that he ran into, and the very narrow zone of appropriateness that some of his clients brought to him, and how that challenged him to get creative. So, zone of appropriateness, that's the topic. Take it into the weekend. What are you up to, Brett?
Well, I'm actually reading that book too. That is one of the things I'll be doing, because I got your recommendation and I thought it was great. And on the topic of reading, I thought I might just direct people, speaking podcasts, I thought I might direct people to a podcast that I love, and it's about reading. And it's called the Read to Lead podcast.
Read to Lead.
Read to Lead podcast. Jeff Brown. I've had the good pleasure of having lunch with Jeff Brown, and we actually did some podcasting training type of thing together. And he's a great guy. He's an ex radio jock from Indianapolis, and he's taken that and moved it into the podcasting realm. And if you're into business books and I mean just any kind of self-development, that kind of thing, books at all, he has a wonderful range of guests that talk about their books and what brought them to read it. So yeah, it just came to mind as you were talking about reading. I thought it was a great thing. So
I don't know who said it first. I like the line, regardless. Leaders are readers, because you cannot lead if you don't feed your brain with information that you didn't have when you started.
That's where I think the topic of the name of the podcast comes from. Leaders read and readers lead. That's a common tagline. So it's great. Yeah. All right. Well, it is the weekend, so everybody have a wonderful weekend. Whatever you're doing, stay safe, of course, and stay distanced, but stay emotionally close. That is, and of course, reach out to us. Send us your comments and questions. You got the way to see us down there. And of course, we may just have a few special guests next week. And if you have something you perhaps might want to come on and talk about, this is a short and sharp show. We would love to have anybody who wants to come on and chin wag with us. People are going to get sick of our ugly mugs after a while. My ugly mug. Okay. Oh, geez. Frail male in the house.
And, where's that poop hat when you need it? So the next week we'll have under a banner. It will be a loose banner, but we thought maybe let's try a week with some context, and we will be talking loosely about how coaching can actually improve your success rate. Well, we're not going to coach you. That's not the format for this, but we'll highlight some of the tools that both Brett and I, and maybe others in the field that you will probably meet next week, how we go about using these and how they can help you. So tune in next week. 2 Chaps, many cultures. Happy weekend to all of you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.